Since I was something like 5 or 6 years old, I had an urge and inclination to teach. I never could figure out exactly what to teach. What the hell is really worth teaching? I think finally I gave up. So now I realize what I teach, it cannot be learned. The only obligation I feel is to keep pointing you back to yourself. Can you be yourself? Can I help hold the space for you to be as you are, to be yourself in the most profound authenticity? I take a stone. Do I need to teach the stone to have a crystalline structure? Do I need to teach the stone to be made of molecules? And the molecules, I need to teach them to be made of atoms. Atoms to be made of electrons, protons, and so on. Do I need to teach that? Nothing to change. Throughout history, people who altered the course of human thinking and the sort of evolution of the psychology of the human being, the change came as they observed reality as it is. You know, Copernicus was one of the great turning points in the thinking of the human mind. Did he change the fact of the way the solar system is organized? I don't think so. Maybe he did, but as far as we can tell, he just observed very keenly, how is it organized? And when he could no longer deny what he sensed, he made an announcement, and it went in the face of all the dharmas up to that time. Maybe not all of them, but the prevalent dharmas. I'm talking about the sort of the mass consensus. Of course, they took his life to try to dispute the evidence, but the cat was out of the bag. And you know, here's a man who it took his entire lifetime of endeavor and observation and investigation to make this profound recognition. And out of that, the human history took a turn, didn't it? It nuanced the trajectory of the human psychology, of the human thinking. And like that, some of our lineage predecessors, such as Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta, observed their own subjective existence very intensely and arrived at a recognition that is their heritage. So now, at what age do children learn about the solar system? You see? I don't know what age, 7, 8, 10 years old. Every children knows how the solar system works. Isn't that amazing, huh? So this understanding of my subjective structure, my means you, everyone, is our heritage. Because a few people, we're going to point at Ramana sometimes, but he's not the only great seer. Because once that knowledge gets one of the cats out of the bag, you can't put it back in. Now it becomes prevalent, available in a prevalent way. So I mean, some children maybe they decide they don't want to go to school, they're going to be ruffians or whatever. So they refuse the responsibility, the path of responsibility we call education, and becoming socialized. The spiritual seekers, the spiritual people who have the most curiosity are the ones who are committed to this investigation. How can I be a more mature being? How can I be a more responsible human being? More educated, more developed in my totality. So that means we gather together to make this observation ourselves, to investigate and harness that recognition for ourselves. And our school is called Waking Down Mutuality. I'm going to explain a little bit about this. Maybe we should have started with an introduction.
Yeah.
But now that I'm talking, let me make a very quick explanation of Waking Down to Mutuality. A lot of you have been to satsang teachers, I think. Huh? I know John has, and Henry has. Others of you have? Or? Tom. See, in my particular way of teaching Waking Down to Mutuality, I break our life into this. The way the rock is on one level it's a stone, another level it's a crystalline structure, another level it's molecules, atoms, and so on. This human, I break it into 7 components. One is their body. One is their identity. And most humans focus on this part of our reality and our development. Some start to include the psychology. They start to investigate either by having therapy or becoming therapy or by studying psychology. And there's another whole field that I designate as non-dual awakening. We could say it's consciousness itself, the conscious principle. Ken Wilber calls it conscious principle. Michael Brown calls it presence, pure presence. I think Eckhart Tolle uses a term similar to that, like that. Another principle that we work with and that I talk about specifically is what I call mutuality. Mutuality is everything that happens when I'm not alone, when I'm with another person, when you're with another person. I call it the membrane of otherness. There's like, when I'm alone, when I say I'm speaking for everyone, I hope. When I'm alone, there's a certain experience, there's a certain subjectivity. My subjectivity is very diffuse. It's unorganized, I go to bed at night. If I'm alone, I throw my stuff on the floor, I go to bed. Someone else is with me, when Gina is with me, then a little different. Anytime another person comes into the space and shares it with me, there's a kind of tension that comes. Otherness. So there's a membrane, like a membrane of otherness. One way that I describe that membrane is it's like an infinite parchment, very thin but parchment paper, in which all of human history is recorded. Human history is about conflict, isn't it? Pick up a history book, what's it tell you? All the conflicts. Mostly that's what they talk about is conflicts. Wars, this war and that war, civil war, war of liberation, whatever. And why did they come? Because of the tension in this membrane. Conflict between men and men, conflict between women and women, conflict between men and women, conflict between races. You have some idea. So mutuality is more than that, but just to point out briefly what I'm talking about. More subtle than any of this, more subtle in the sense that it's not the visible part. It's what I call the cosmic form. The cosmic form is a subtle form. I'm not going to say too much about it because we have very limited time. And beyond subtle form is what I call goddess source. It's as though it's like the light coming from the sun is pure white light, but when it comes into diffusing tendency of what we call matter is broken into 7 colors: blue, green, like that. All the colors come. So that one light of reality is broken into, I break it into these 7 components. In some sense, it's arbitrary. But one reason I do that is so I can make distinctions about waking down mutuality. Those of you who have been to satsang teachers and teachings, what's called Advaita, we're talking about this, non-dual awakening, awakening to the conscious principle. And they'll use phrases like your true self and your false self. The false self in their language would be this domain, the true self being this domain. My teaching is about all of these, but I'm not going to go into this at this point. This is way more advanced. Waking down to mutuality deals with these three domains in simultaneity. So many schools deal with this, some deal with this, some deal with both of these. We're the only one that I know of that deals with all 3 of these in a synchronistic wholeness. And as they say, the sum of the parts is greater, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So there's a synergistic something that happens in this work that quickens our life process, that invites us forward according to our pace and according to our own flowering. There's very little requirement to enter this work, to enter this stream of sensitization, of recognition. You could call it transmission. We just, this workshop we just did near Albany, there's a young lady there who came into the work last September, and she was so timid and wasn't even sure she wanted to come in the room. And I think last month she went through the transition we call second birth awakening. It was like a different person, such a profound transformation. She had no prior spiritual study, no prior books, teachers, nothing. Didn't consider herself a candidate. It was so innocent. She wasn't burdened with all this information and teachings and thoughts and ideas and concepts. It took me longer because I had a lot of concepts to deal with. I think that's about all I'm going to say. Is okay, we're going to have some sharing time. It won't be. I'd like to have each person 15, 20 minutes of sharing time. The way forward in this work towards this, we'll say, greater truth is through what's true for you here and now. What's your truth right now? And being able to speak that into the space. And what you're sharing is in confidence. We don't talk about it outside this meeting. Again, I want to appreciate everybody for coming. Let's see. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And Gina, my partner, is an official mentor in Waking Down. Hopefully you'll have some time to share about your life, your process, yourself, and if you like a little bit of feedback. I think first let's just have a real quick introduction, everybody's name and a couple of words about yourself, where you live or how you feel or something. Can we do that quickly?
Like 1 or 2 sentences.
Yeah, just very briefly. I'll start with you, Tom.
I'm Tom Pratt. I'm from up the street in Woburn. And
how did they cut it down? How did they make it into this little piece and these colors? And where did the ink come from? Who put it together? Who shipped it? Who sold it? It's so interwoven. Everything is so embedded in the fabric of existence. And then we have this real experience of an extracted me. A me that's extracted, that's abstracted from the fabric of existence. It's a very mysterious thing. I love what you guys said. It's so beautiful. You need to teach when you've got all that wisdom. Because it's about the feeling of it, Because we can understand it all day long, but it's the investigation of the feeling. And from my perspective, a big part of how that, see what happened in my case, and if you watch any of my interviews, I talk about it. In the Batcap interview, I think I talked about it quite a lot. I was less than 4 years old, and I could still remember my nature before the birth event. And that forming, that very primitive, beginning to form mind, much more primitive than a 4-year-old now, believe me. I mean, we grew up in the mountains, and when I was that young, we had no running water, no electricity, no bathroom. We were just surviving day to day. But when I saw this, I concluded the concepts didn't form that way, but when later I could put concepts around it, what happened for me, it was like I felt like I'd been kidnapped from my real world, brought into this strange, dark, heavy domain, and that these creatures were trying to convince me I was one of them. And I swore with all my strength I'd never forget. And I never forget. I never lost that memory. And I also vowed with all my strength that I'd find my way back home. I had no idea what I was talking about. I mean, there's much more to the story. But because of that, somehow I've been able to kind of demarcate energetically how the me comes into, how it becomes so gripping, how it usurps our subjectivity into this agitation of me. Separation, a sense of separation. And that sense of separation is where the suffering lies. That's the domain of the suffering. Pain is one thing. Pain is obligatory. Pain comes with being a human. Physical pain, diseases, threats, all kinds of normal pains are there. Loss of somebody you love. My wife died 15 years ago of cancer. I can't imagine losing a child. There's enormous pains that we can't escape. It just comes with being human. Gina has a lot of pain in her knee now. But then there's this suffering thing. The suffering, where does that belong? It's in the domain of that. It's based in that feeling of separation. John mentioned the curiosity about the cosmic form. Cosmic form, we knew before we came into physical form. When I say we, I'm not talking about the me that is dominant in this form. But in that cosmic form, the sense of separation, the way you can know things now intellectually but not totally own them, the only way that separation can be known is in this domain, through this mechanism. Mm-hmm. That's why I say it's neither true nor false, but it's a blend of true and false. And see, from my perspective, this isn't some sort of punishment that we're here. A lot of the dharmas present human. Like I was with some people the other day, and this guy was talking about karma and like it's some sort of punitive thing. Almost like the thing like God's this gray-haired guy, and this guy that punishes people for. Why are you punishing me now? What the hell did I do now? You don't even know you did anything, and all of a sudden God's punishing you. What kind of insanity is that? But I want to just give a very clear picture of one of the ways in which that whole me kind of concretizes. I started school in this little one-room schoolhouse way out on the side of a mountain, more primitive than, just like Abraham Lincoln primitive. And one of the first things, I was the first student to learn what this means. And I was proud. Well, I came home and I was like, wow, I learned how to spell. I learned what that means. I was excited, And this is how, see, my excitement, and because they had rewarded me. Oh, wow, yeah, this is great, good boy. Before, I could look at that all day and not have a clue what it was about. I was like the blank paper. All of a sudden, cat comes. That was 58 years ago. And I still can't forget it. I can't look at that now. 5 minutes before, I could look at it and not know. 5 minutes instruction, and 63 years later, I still can't forget it. That's the nature of the me. You get some idea what I'm talking about? How do you know you were born? Think about it. How do you know you were born?
Well, people tell you.
Exactly. Otherwise, how do you know?
I don't know.
You
You
really-
remember, I suppose. Some people claim that.
No, I can remember, but I'm talking about just the mundane conversation.
Oh.
I mean, you know, you can be hypnotized or rebirthed or whatever and go back to that memory. The memory is stored, but it's a very deep cellular thing. But you, the fact that you were born, you were told. Otherwise, you know, I have, for example, I have a friend who's what's called a walk-in. I knew the guy for years, and when he described his experience, it's pretty hard to refute it.
I'm sorry, what is it walking?
Huh?
What is it walking?
No, I don't want to go into this. I'm just saying, he didn't have a birth.
Oh.
When the body was, I don't know, 15, 16 years old, his spirit came into the body and the other spirit left. I mean, I don't think it's a common thing, but I have one friend who's pretty realistic.
You paid more rent until the body you'll pay a
Yeah.
higher rent.
Anyhow, I'm just pointing to how this me forms. The me forms. And so that we can begin to sense the vastness that we are and begin to permit the me in a way that expands our domain of subjectivity. You follow that? Because huh?
No following what
Okay. The suffering is about the separation.
Yeah.
The separation and the suffering is because our sense of subjectivity is locked into the identity structure. And the identity structure we learned, like I learned cat.
Okay.
And once you learn it, every time you look in the mirror, oh, there's Allan again.
Oh, I see.
You ever have that experience? You go look in the mirror and, oh, God, where'd that guy come from? Once you learn your identity, you can't forget it. Now you can go to war with it, and if you're good at the war, you can go enter this non-dual awakening, and the me can dissolve. I went through that in 1992. The me, the identity, completely dissolved. I could not locate any sense of being a human, of being a body. It was just gone. But with time and maturity, it's there now. It's very clear to me that it is not a problem. I mean, it is a problem sometimes, but it's not. It doesn't have that suffering to it on a continuous basis. Is this helpful at all? So that the me begins to just be part of the picture. You know, the Allan with all his stupid little nuances. I mean, there's parts of him I just like, God, would you please go away? Give me a vacation. Yeah.
When your sense of the me dissolved in 1992, were you able to function in the world?
It was great for me. I was in that transition time. I was in extreme ecstasy, 24/7, maddening ecstasy.
Who picked up the mail? Who did daily things? I mean,
See, from my perspective, at that point, everything's just happening. Everything's just in the stream of life.
okay, great. Yeah.
But for the people around me, it was intolerable.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Why?
I could not conduct a conversation from the standpoint of a me. I couldn't do it. My sense of subjectivity was infinitely everywhere. My sense of myself was the same as light. It wasn't like there was no locus of individuality here. Nothing. At that time I was supposed to sign some papers. I remember, like, it was for the tax return, because I'm self-employed, for the, what do you call it, sales tax. At that point you had to sign a paper. And it felt like an enormous crime that I was going to say that I have a name. What the hell is that? How could it be? How could I have a name? I don't even have a form. I'm just light. There's no form. There's no identity. How could I say there is? Like that. It was challenging to everybody around me. But for me, God, I can't tell you the freedom, the immensity.
So in that time.
No, the only reason I'm talking about is not just so you think about me, but so you can start to sense your own reality. It's not about Allan, it's about you. That cosmic presence shows up in your immediate experience as consciousness. And the me is a congealed, somewhat congealedness of it. It's a bit congealed into an identity. And it's okay. No, okay, now the suffering, where the suffering really starts to have its bite, is when we transition around that age of 2, 3, 4, 5 into an identity. When the identity starts to grip. Particularly when there is a traumatizing impingement of it. When it comes, it kind of creeps in slowly, and then all of a sudden your father smacks you, or something happens that suddenly it grips you. It comes in, like that thing with the snake, it kind of creeps in. To stay with that one gave up their freedom, and I thought about why would they do that? Why would they do that? And I realized they wanted to be with themselves. They knew themselves as a species. We know ourselves as an identity. We also have a species thing, but the identity becomes like our domain, it becomes a kind of imprisonment. And then it's always being haunted by this sense of something great, something worthwhile about me. So we're trying to prove that within this identity structure. So what happens is we end up trying to strengthen the identity to validate that sense of value that we have. So for a basketball player, we want to be the best basketball player. If we're in the business, we want to be wealthy. If we're into macho stuff, and then we want to have 100 girlfriends, like that, or a lot of cars, or a lot, whatever, to validate the meaningfulness of that identity. So the humiliation, in my opinion, onset of humiliation is the loss of innocence when the identity starts to grip us. When we start to be gripped into that identity, hypnotized into the identity, we feel that's so humiliating to be trapped in that little isness of a human. And so it invokes all kinds of anger, humiliation, and I don't want to go there. You just say no to it. But what happens in this work is through the nurturing, holding, and mutuality, you begin to allow it to come to you. You begin to just see, in your case, life reconvened your experience to bring you to your knees of that humiliation. And what happens is when you give yourself to that humiliation, it brings you to the doorstep of what we call the core wound. The core wound is the agitation, the constant irritation of being both infinite and limited at the same time. That's the core wound. And so really, I think that's what you're talking about, is your experience that's taking you to the core wound. And in the past, all the spiritual efforts have been to avoid that core wound, get out of that. Either become so spiritual, like I did in 1992, that you're untouched by it, or it becomes or you throw yourself on the other side of the equation and keep trying to shore up your individuality through money, whatever, all these different ways. These people now are, some people build bomb shelter homes, try to make that identity so permanent. But it's the bothness in the irritating paradox of it. We call it core wound, and the being able to settle into that opens up what we call second birth.
Well, I feel like I've been settling into it for way long enough.
So we have this term for that beginning to be able to settle into it. We call that the rot. When the rot means you just can no longer make those great efforts to escape it, and just like you just kind of just can't do it anymore. What the hell is this? And really start the investigation. How's the time?
That's 2 minutes.
Does that help?
Yeah.
So, and to get that, everybody has some version of this. And I could say more about it, but
Sometimes I wonder if, I'm saying, be it ever so sucky, there's no place like home. And so there's almost a desire to stay stuck in this, I wonder about that. A desire to
Stay stuck in
the humiliation
Familiar.
and the bond.
huh?
There's maybe an unconscious desire to stay there because it feels like home. Because of the way I was brought up, the kind of emotional, psychological difficulty that I had in my family of origin. I'm so used to it that it feels like home.
Yeah.
So I hope that's not making the process longer than necessary. But who knows? I don't know.
Well, yeah. Somebody coined a term yesterday, the gravitational pull of my issues or something like that. What was that you said?
It was Tom.
What's
Were you
that?
talking about the pole or something?
Forget.
It was good.
That was just yesterday.
Yeah, but it has its own gravity.
You're a different person today.
One of the reasons for that gravitational pull is that it's not all as personal as it seems to be. It's transpersonal.
Unfortunately, I get that part of it,
Yeah.
but that's still very real for me a year later.
It's transpersonal, and it also has a cosmic element, because when you look at your human design, which is based purely on your birth date, your birth moment, you can see that a lot of it's just there. It's just forgiven. It's not something to even overcome. But in knowing that it's transpersonal and knowing that it's a given, it starts to give you space with it, so that the journey is not to become free from it, but to become free as it.
Thanks.
Now, Samuel coined a term for this thing that John was talking about, governing sentimentalities.
What was that?
Samuel coined a term for the like John was talking
I didn't
about,
get the phrase with the 2 words that you said.
governing sentimentalities.
Thank you.
But you shouldn't be
Like,
angry.
yeah, like John was saying, you shouldn't, it's not spiritual to be angry, it's a governing sentimentality.
Everybody buys into
Yeah, there's sort of consensus as that's how it is. One is to see that it's a governing sentimentality, and like John said, you don't know how he got there, because it's based in transpersonal psychology. And the other thing in my work is to be able to make discernment as, okay, where does it belong in the spectrum of my existence? That's an issue that belongs in my personal domain, and then deeper in my transpersonal domain, it doesn't have a bite, it's not even felt. So the direction we're moving into is sort of living the whole domain of our being, from the most personal to the most transpersonal. That's okay. Okay, who's next?
There you go.
Good, great.